Hello guys, welcome back. In this course we will be learning core concepts of JavaScript. So the prerequisites for this course is like you need to know the basic variables, conditional statements, loops and all. And in this is the starting video, and in this video we will be discussing functions and then the call stack. Okay, and this is a kind of fundamentals. Let's get into the video. So now here I just made a simple project, index.html and then functions.js. I linked the JS file inside and then I opened it with live server. Okay, and here I'm going to write my code. So coming to functions, and like we declare variables by using let keyword like this, right? So similarly for creating a function we use the function keyword and then the name of the function. So let me name it as to be test, and then we keep round braces like this, and we open close the curly braces, and inside this we are going to write some code. And what is the definition of a function? A function is a piece of code that can be executed whenever we wanted to execute. So that's the use of a function, and functions are especially used for reusing the code. And now, like how we declared a variable a, there is a syntax to declare a function like this using function keyword, and the naming convention for the function names should follow the same rule that we followed for the naming convention of the variables. Like we need to start with an underscore or an alpha numeric we need to start with alpha characters or underscores and dollar signs, right? So similarly the variable functions also should follow the same naming conventions, because in JavaScript functions are variables only. Okay, only the declaration is different. Like we declared it with function keyword, and here we declared it with let keyword. Actually functions can also be declared by using let and const keyword as well, but we will see about them in the future sessions. So yeah, now this is just a function, and inside this we can write any amount of code. Literally, like if you want to write 1000 lines of code, we can write there. And but here I am going to write a single statement saying hello functions, something like this. And now this is just a function definition. Okay, so this is just a function definition, and here is just a variable definition. Now when you wanted to execute the block of code of a particular function, so this selected block of code, when you wanted to execute, you have to make a call to that function. So for making a call to function, we use the function name and then followed by the round braces. So this we call as function call or function invocation. Both are same. So this we call as what? Function call or function invocation. And whenever we call the function, basically the block of code present inside function will get executed. So let me save, and you see the block of code that is present inside the function got executed. That's why we are being printed with this hello functions text in the console. Now this is pretty much about basic functions, and functions actually can take some data from outside, basically from the call of invocation, and functions can also return some other data to outside. So it can take some data and it can do some performance and it can return something. So let's say I'll make the function name test to be add for the convenience, and then this add function takes two data like 10 and 20, two numbers, and what it's going to do is it's going to take them here like in the variable format a and b, and then what it's going to do is it's going to return something called a plus b. So I just created a function called add function, and inside this we use a keyword called return. I will tell you what it does. So basically this is a function declaration, and it's going to take some data, and this a and b are pretty much like variables, and these we call as parameters. So these are variables only, and we call these as parameters. And so this is the function definition, and this is the function call. And in the function call I'm passing some values, right? Two numbers I'm passing. So these two numbers we call as arguments. So these two numbers we call as what? Arguments. And whenever we call a function by passing arguments, the parameters will capture those arguments. So here the parameters are a and b, and a will capture the 10, b will capture the 20 respectively. So how will they capture? So basically internally there will be a line of code which is something like this, gets executed just like this, because parameters are the variables which will behave as if they are declared inside that functions. So A will be capturing 10 and then B will be capturing 20. And once that is done, so here it computes A plus B and then it returns that summation, which is 30. So here this function is returning some data, right? So that means the return value we should capture into some variable, so that I name it as the result. And then to see the result, I'll just print after capturing that result, just like this. So basically what happens is, like variable A is declared, which we don't want, and here is this is the function definition, which is taking some data, which is A and B, and it's going to return the summation of those A and B. So it takes some data and does some performance, which is addition, and returns it. And here at line number 5 we created a variable result and we called the function by passing some data, and this function is going to return whatever the data that returns by this function, that will be captured by the variable result. And then once line number 5 is done, line number 6 will be executed, and where it prints the captured value by the result variable. So let me save, and you see 30 is got printed at line number 6. Basically the result variable got printed. Now this is the just we have written code and we have seen the output, right? So still some people might not get the idea, because you might know how does these things gets executed internally. Now even though if you have doubts till this point, that's completely fine, but whatever I am going to discuss now, if you understand that, like, you can play with functions. So now coming to introduction of call stack. So call stack, I will just give the formal definition of call stack. So a call stack is a mechanism that is used by JavaScript interpreter to execute the JavaScript code. Okay, so that's the official definition of call stack. I will tell you why the name call stack comes, but before we see why the name call stack, let's try to understand what call stack does. So the call stack work is to execute the JavaScript code. The call stack work is to execute the JavaScript code. So let me draw that call stack. So call stack, you can assume it is something like this, a container, and yeah, this is fine. Now let's try to analyze this piece of code, how it gets executed internally in the JavaScript engine by using the mechanism of call stack. So this one we call as call stack. And now before we jump into that, we need to understand two things. One is global and the other one is local. So these two words you need to understand, what is global and what is local. So global means when a line of code is not present inside a function, that we call as it's present in the global scope. Or else when a line of code which is present inside a function, and that line of code we call as a local scope code. So if you look at line number 5, so line number 5 is the one which is present not inside a function. So the line number 5 is not present inside any function. That means we can say line number 5 is in the global scope. Similarly, line number 6 is also not present inside any function. So this is also in the global scope. And here you see this declaration of function is also not inside any function. So we can say it is in the global scope. But if you see line number 3 is strictly present inside the curly braces of the function. So this line number 3, we say it is present inside the local scope. Okay, so that is about global and local. Now whenever you run the JavaScript code in the call stack, at the very bottommost of the call stack, a container gets created, and that container is called as global execution context. Global execution context. And this global execution context container is the one which is responsible to execute all the lines of code that's present in the global scope. So let me repeat again. So global execution context container is the one which is responsible to execute all the lines of code present in the global scope. That means the ones which are not present inside a function. So, and if you remember, JavaScript will get executed sequentially, line by line, always. Now this is just a definition of a function. So let us start executing the JavaScript code. So at line number 1 we have declared a function called add, right? Add function is declared. I told you functions are also variables. So the variable add gets declared within the global execution context, because the line number 1 is strictly there in the global execution context. It's not there in some other functions, inside some other function. So add variable got created and its value is a function value. So to indicate its function value, just use this round braces. Now you might expect after line number 1 it is going to execute line number 2 and then line number 3 and so on, but no, because this is a function definition. This will not be executed until and unless we make a call to it. So this is just a definition, right? So after line number 1, which is the declaration of the function variable, the control directly jumps to line number 5, which is not inside this function. And then at line number 5 we are declared another variable called result, just like this. And for this result we assign something called the invocation of the function. And here you need to remember another point called, so whenever we invoke a function, there will be a pause within that context, and a brand new execution context will get created for that particular function on top of the current execution context. So the current execution context is global execution context, and the function call or the function invocation is made inside global, that means at line number 5. So for that function, since we are making an invocation for that function, a brand new execution context gets created like this, and there will be a pause, and after that context gets created, the values which are arguments will be passed to that function respectively. So 10 and 20 will be passed. And now what is this? This is the local execution context. To be specific, it is the add execution context, because it's a execution context of add function, because we invoke the add function over here. And now since we are passing some data to this context like 10 and 20 numbers, and 10 and 20 will be captured. And here the question is, who will capture 10 and 20? As I told, the arguments will be captured always by the respective parameters. Parameters are the one which are declared during the definition of that function. Now a is the first parameter, so it will capture 10 only, it won't capture 20. And similarly b is the second parameter, so it will capture 20 only, which is the second argument. Now why I am declaring a and b within this add execution context? Why not I am declaring inside the global execution context, even though it seems like these two things are at line number 1, which is in the global, right? Because the parameters will behave as if they are declared inside that function. So don't look at this line number 1, but look at internally at this line number 2. Okay, so that's why these variables I have drawn inside this add execution context only, because they behave as if they are inside that context. And now that is done, the control will move on to line number 3. And at line number 3 we are computing some value called a plus b, right? And what is a plus b? So a value is 10 and then b value is 20. So a plus b is what? 30. And before this a plus b value we had a keyword called return. So remember, whenever return statement gets executed in a function, that's the end of the function, that's the termination of the function, and whatever it returns, that will be returned back to where we made a call to that function. So we made a call to this function at line number 5, and what it is returning? It's returning 30, right? And once it returned, what will happen? The context will going to get erased, because that's the termination of that particular function. So whenever return statement get executed in a function, that's the termination of that function. And now it returned the value 30, right? And the 30 value will be given to whom? It will be given to variable result. So let me do that. So the value 30 be given to variable result. And now we are done with line number 5. And then the control will move to line number 6. So at line number 6, what we are doing, where the line number 6 is there, it's in the global. That means line number 6 is there in the global execution context only. So here I am printing result. So is there a variable result in the context? Yes. What's the value of it? It's 30. So 30 gets printed onto the console. So 30 will be printed onto the console. And now once it is printed, the control will move on to the 7th line, and from 7th line there is nothing in the global execution context. When there is nothing inside a context, what will happen? That's the termination of that context, so that context should get erased, just like this. So when the global execution context gets terminated or erased from the call stack, that's the end of the execution of the JavaScript file. Okay, now we are done with the execution of the JavaScript program that we have written here. And what it printed 30 in the console. Okay, this is the output. So basically this is the one, all these things are done by the JavaScript interpreter internally inside the JavaScript engine. So I hope you understand this, and let me show you, and you see we get 30 over here. So that's how we are printed. Okay, now let's take a little let's practice something more on it. So in JavaScript we have a flexibility that we can actually create functions inside another functions. So that's the power of JavaScript. So we can declare another function called subtract, and then the subtract function is going to take some x and y as the parameters. Okay, and this is going to return x minus y, and after function definition I'm going to log the subtract call by passing 20 or something like 50 and then 20, just like this. Okay, and remaining code is as is. So let's try to understand what is the output of this code before I save it. So what will happen when we run this file? Immediately what happens? Firstly, at the very bottommost of the call stack, global execution context gets created, global execution context, and it starts executing from line number 1. So from line number 1 to line number 8, this is just a definition of add function. So add variable will be created in the global with the value of a function, and then the control directly jumps to line number 9, and at line number 9 we have created a variable result, and for this result what we did, we are assigning the invocation of add function by passing 2 numbers. So 2 numbers be passed to a brand new context that will get created because it's an invocation. So add execution context be created because we invoked the function. So this is add execution context. And now who is there to capture? So in the add there are parameters a and b. So a and b will capture 10 and b will capture 20 respectively. And then the control jumps into line number 3. So at line number 3, from line number 3 to line number 5, you see it's again a function declaration which is named as subtract. Basically it's a variable, and this line number 3 is present inside the add execution context. So we have to create the variable subtract within this context. And from line number 3 to line number 5, just a declaration, and the control moves to line number 6. So at line number 6, that's also inside this context only, we are logging the invocation of subtract by passing 50 and 20. And just look at this is the invocation of the function, right? So here we are invoking the subtract function by passing 50 and 20. So I told you, whenever we invoke a function, what will happen? A brand new context gets created, and that context will take the arguments that we passed. So 50 and 20 will be taken by the new context that will get created, and the context name is subtract execution context. And in the subtract execution context, who is there? The parameters to capture the arguments that we passed, x and y. So x will capture 50 and y will capture 20 respectively. And then we will enter into that function, basically line number 4, and line number 4, if you see, it's present in the subtract execution context, not in the add execution context, but in the subtract execution context. And in the subtract execution context, directly a return statement is there, which is x minus y. That means 50 minus 30, 50 minus 20, so which is 30. So that will be returned back to where we called. So basically here in place of this we get 30, and it has returned, right? So since it has returned, so this will get erased from the call stack. The function execution context execution is done. So the subtract execution is done. Now the control, wherever it paused at line number 6, that will play now, and it is going to print 30 in the console. So 30 gets printed in the console first. Here 30 gets printed in the console, and then line number 6 we are done. The control moves on to line number 7, and you see line number 7 is present inside the add execution context. And at line number 7, what we are doing, we are returning something which is a plus b, and there is a and there is a b, which is 10 and 20. So 10 plus 20 is 30. 10 plus 20 is 30. So 30 is returned back to where we called in the global. And since the return statement got executed, what will happen, this context will also get erased, just like this. And then the control gets back to the global execution context, and in the global execution context, so in place of this we get the return value, which is 30, and the result variable has captured the number 30. And once that is done, we come to line number 10, and at line number 10 we are printing the variable result. So line number 10 is strictly present inside global execution context, and when we print result, the value of result is 30, so 30 gets printed. So the second output would be again 30. So that is our code's output. So two 30s will be printed. One is at line number 6 here, and the other one is at line number 10. Let me save. So you see at line number 6 a 30, and then at line number 10 another 30. And one more thing is, like, after printing this result, what will happen, there is no more code in the global execution context as well. So global execution context will also be erased, and that's the end of the program. Okay, and all these things are executed by JS interpreter within some milliseconds of time. Okay, so for your understanding purpose, I shown all this, right? But internally JavaScript interpreter will do all this in milliseconds. So I hope you understand this, and in the upcoming videos we will try to understand little more about JavaScript. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, please do subscribe.